Call this meeting to order. It is Tuesday, April 23rd. This is the informational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. I welcome everyone who's here at the Carnegie Town Hall. And those of you watching us live on CityLink and siouxfalls.org, good to have you all here. We're going to start, pretty short agenda today, but we have a work session following this, so we'll start right away with a report on the Land Use Committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, on the 16th we had a Land Use Committee. We had one agenda item, which was facade easement program, a review of that. We had a good report or a good program put on. Brent O'Neill, Dave Bixler gave us some information, and Paul Bangford from our city attorney's office gave us the information that we wanted. We went ahead and decided to pass it on to leadership, and we're doing some things with the information that we had. Whether or not it'll get all the way up, we don't know yet, but we're looking at it, and it was a good meeting. Good, thank you.
The facade easement program is the subject of a bus tour on our informational meeting on May 7th. It will be open to the public. You'll have more details about it coming soon, but we'll tour some of those locations that have been affected by that and have an opportunity to have that conversation about that program at that time. So May 7th, bus tour. Then going into City Council open discussion, I'm going to take a moment. It's not on the agenda, but just step back for a moment and have the team leaders from the Emergency Operations Center are here, and they're just going to give us their latest update on tree removal and make the snow stop, please.
Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. We have a few slides to show you to bring you current with the Operation Timber Strike. With us as well as Director Don Kearney, who will have a few slides, and Kendra Simmonsma and Regan Smith are here as well. So let's get started. We know we're working under open discussion, so we'll make this timely. We do have a couple of pictures just to show just the level of trees that have been down either over the sidewalks or over the roads. It's been a progressive method to first open up the roadways and then start going systematically through the neighborhoods. Now there's been teams of arborists that are going through the neighborhoods to just trim the broken branches that are hanging over the street or the sidewalk, and that will happen for several weeks to come. This is a recap on how the branch pickup has come. The first column is the date, and then the next one is the miles per day, and then the last is a cumulative. And the cumulative for the first pass would roll up to 815 miles. We are working on those outskirt neighborhoods where the trees are young, and so you'll start to see many, many miles accomplished on a daily basis now. But just Saturday, with a combination of still working with all of the local contractors, there was 197 miles accomplished that particular day, and that was our all-time high for last week. This is the map that we've put out on the website on a daily basis to show people where we've been for first pass and where we're going. The green, once we turn it green, that means we've been through that area for the first pass. The yellow, again, especially to the south and the extremities to the east, there's not a lot of product out there. One of the ideas came in from the field that since in a lot of those cases there may be a branch pile every 5 houses, that just a good strategy would be to just have the parks chipping crews drive through those neighborhoods, pick up those piles and just chip them. And so that's worked really good. We expect to turn many of these sections green tomorrow with the hope of getting through first pass this week. That's our primary goal. So this is a graphic that people can go out on the website and see on a daily basis the progress. Another picture of just how the operation works and the scale of the equipment, but there's just been an enormous amount of debris that's been moved from the boulevards into the street, ultimately loaded and hauled to the multiple branch drop-off sites. This is a picture of the arborists that have been hired, and there's about 35 local arborists that we initially brought on so we could really get a handle on getting ahead of those very hazardous branches. Again, their role is not to prune trees. Their job is just to simply go in and cut the hangers that are either hanging in the street or over the sidewalk. And so that's worked really good. We expect to turn many of these sections green tomorrow with the hope of getting through first pass this week. That's our primary goal. So this is a graphic that people can go out on the website and see on a daily basis the progress. Another picture of just how the operation works and the scale of the equipment, but there's just been an enormous amount of debris that's been moved from the boulevards into the street, ultimately loaded and hauled to the multiple branch drop-off sites. Here's a picture of one of the multiple branch drop-off sites, just to stay ahead of all the debris. There's dozers, and those are very large dozers, so it gives you a perspective on how big those branch piles are getting. But things are working really efficiently. The people on their own properties have really done a lot of work to get the product to the street, and then ultimately the state, county, city, and private contractors with the First Pass have done a good job getting through those in a very organized fashion. Just one comment before we go on to Don's piece is that we are now in the transition where we're transitioned from the hourly contracts that we've used to pick up the First Pass into bid those. Cirrus is a company that does this all over the country, that ultimately they have these very large dump body trucks that come in, and they got the low bid, and they do this very efficiently. And so you start to see a company named Cirrus be talked about. It's CERES, and then they ultimately bring in other partners, and they will really start to transition into picking up the debris piles. They have these large trucks that have they have arms on them that actually reach out and grab the branch pile and put in, and they're very high capacity. So we'll see how they work. They just began today. They'll really be into an operation tomorrow. We also have to have a monitoring company monitors what they do, so we can track for FEMA purposes if there is a presidential declaration. So the monitoring company's been hired as well, and well as you have to monitor all the arborists. Now as we transition from the emergency to the recovery, it'll be a 1-to-1 ratio with an arborist and a monitor to not only GPS the tree location, take a picture before and after, and start that documentation process. So we've hired one monitoring company that's worked under the FEMA guidelines multiple times, and then we went out to bid. We'll now start to pay by the ton for the debris to be hauled to the branch drop-off sites, and we'll pay by the tree for them to trim the hangers. So with that, that's an update on the process. Again, we're not through First Pass yet, but our goal is to get through it this week, and then ultimately start to move into Second Pass. I'll bring forward Don Kearney with the park recovery plan.
Thank you. Welcome, Don.
Who's it?
That's right there, yeah.
Good afternoon, City Council members. Don Kearney with Parks and Rec. The map that you see on the screen is a map that we have placed on the website to provide the residents a status update of where we are at in the recovery of our park system. The green means that the park is open, there aren't any hazards, and they're available for public use. The items, the parks that are identified in red still have not been cleared. One of the challenges that we have, because of all the moisture we received, it's difficult for us to be able to get into the interior portions of those parks because it's so soft with our heavy equipment. And so we'll continue to turn those red parks into green parks so that it signifies that it's available and safe to use. We're asking people to stay out of those parks that are identified in red. And then the other thing I would share with you is that we have identified a priority system. As of last Friday, we did open up the bike trail and cleared that entire area. The other areas that we're currently working on are spring sports fields. We have baseball, softball, and soccer that are gearing up and would probably be a couple weeks into their season by now. But we are working on those areas to get those ready. We're also working on those high-use parks, those community regional parks like Falls Park, Tut Hill, Sertoma, McKinnon, to get those opened up. We're working on our golf courses. Ultimately, we'll work in our neighborhood parks, and then also clear our waterways, that being Skunk Creek and the Big Sioux River. The other thing I wanted to share with the council today is that just talk a little bit about the process. Obviously, there's a branch clearing process of just hauling the branches to the edge of the city properties, clearing any hangers that we can get from the ground, and then also clearing those hangers I talked about. We've been able to get them from the streets and the parking lots to the extent that we could, but when it dries out, probably next week, we'll be able to go in and actually remove those hangers in the balance of the park. And then we're currently simultaneously working on opening up restrooms, getting drinking fountains energized, getting garbage cans in place, those things that we need to support the daily operations, including field prep and that kind of thing. So just an example of the amount of brush that was hauled to the edge by Department of Corrections employees, or inmates, excuse me, to the edge of McKinnon Park, to give you a visual of that. The other thing that we have is that you'll notice that as of Saturday, we had 487 people working on the cleanup effort and 263 pieces of equipment mobilized at that time to work on the recovery effort. And then this is just another breakdown of the types of equipment that we have out there. And then finally, a breakdown of personnel between private workers, inmates, city workers, Minnehaha County workers, and then state workers that we have working on the recovery effort. So I think we'd be available for questions if there are any.
Thank you. Questions from council. Councilor Anderson.
Don, have you sent out any messages to the leagues and that are looking at starting this week and advise them, you know, what we're looking at for a start time for some of these parks?
Yeah, we're every day we learn a little bit more about how ready we're going to be able to be, but we're pretty confident in some of those sports complexes, especially like Harmadon, where there are really a lot of smaller trees. There really aren't any impacts on the east side or the softball side because we didn't have any damage there. But on the west side, like at Harmadon, on the baseball side, we had some backstop damage, and so that's going to limit the number of fields that we have available for play. But we're already working with Augustana and the Sioux Falls Canary Stadium as well to try to provide alternate places to play. But we are in regular contact with those leagues to keep them abreast of where we're at, if we think they're going to impact it.
I had one question for Mark Cotter, or do you want to wait
No,
until?
go ahead. If you don't mind switching back and forth, we'll just.
Mark, with our tree recovery program and everything, are we covering all sections of the city, including like maybe the old Orchard area?
We'll drive all public streets that are in public right-of-way, and ultimately anything that's hanging in the public right-of-way or over the sidewalk we'll trim. There are some private streets in town, and those essentially get treated just like private property. And so I know that some of the councilors got actually called about why were we not going down some of the private streets, and we treat them just like whether it's the private street at in a business or anything else. So what we've communicated to those people is that if you get all that product out to the public right away, we'll come by and pick it up.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Councilor Aguilar.
Yes, Mark, do we have an estimate on how many pass-throughs we're expecting to make through the neighborhoods?
I know we've started to talk with this national firm about what they normally see, and what they said they normally see is 3, at least in the most impacted areas. And so we're hoping to get through first pass this week. I think personally we should gauge it to see how much product's out there. But if we then go in to get second pass, and then we'll ultimately see if there are some areas, I mean, I would forecast on the outskirts of town that 1 pass is probably adequate. In the core part of town, I can certainly see 3 passes is going to be required.
Can I, one other, street cleanup in the residential areas, what's the process?
We initially, because this first process when using the contractors, they were taking all the material, putting it on the street, and a lot of times pushing it all the way down the street and then loading it. And so that created some pretty messy streets. So to come behind them, we hired Merle and Royce Paving, and they had these self-propelled brooms, and we brushed a lot of that into the gutter pan. We've seen a lot of people raking that up and ultimately getting it into piles as well. The question that we asked this Cirrus, with these trucks that ultimately self-load, that they expect to pull up next to a pile, reach over, grab it, and pick it up. So I think we're going to see a lot less product put on the roads. But what we've had to do so far is our normal street sweepers, just with the activity near the the dump-off sites. We have had to keep them there just to keep those streets reasonably clean. So our initial effort was, let's hire the contractor to just go through and ultimately keep that product off the driving lanes. It is going to take us some time because normally for us to do the first pass of sweeping through the city with 6 sweepers without tree branches, it takes us 12 to 14 weeks. And so that's probably going to be one of those residual efforts that's going to take us a while with all the de-icing chemicals and sand that we put down this winter, and now all the trees. Recovering some of these neighborhoods with the condition of the streets is going to take some time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Staggers.
Yes, Mark. Boy, I've had many comments from people of how well the city's doing on this.
Oh, good.
To me, it's Public Works. You're doing a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you.
But I have been surprised by a few comments from people that they don't want FEMA coming in here at all.
Oh.
I think part of it is because, well, this isn't a pleasant thing we're experiencing, but it's far from a national emergency. And it would be good if the city could set an example for the rest of the country that, no, we're not going to just automatically go to the federal government to try to get money, especially when the federal government really doesn't have the money with all the debt that we have.
Okay.
So I don't know if anybody's expressed this to you or not about not having FEMA come in. But one final question here I have is in regard to cost. Do we have any estimated cost of how much we've spent now or how much we're going to be spending in the future?
We're just starting to, since we had the contractors work through Saturday, we're starting to track down what those costs are, and and then ultimately we've also had the arborists, we've had correctional workers that have costs. We'll have some costs with the state, but today I don't have an estimate for you. But once we get those, and then I think it'll also be, we'll get into a much different rhythm now. Instead of paying on the hourly basis, we'll actually pay for the debris by the ton. And so by noon the next day, we can always do a roll-up of how much tonnage was hauled, and ultimately what that cost is. The cost is about $67 a ton. That I think then that will give us a sense to start making some projections. And so I know people want to know what this is going to cost, but I think until we get a little bit further through it, we just ask for a little bit more time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Other questions from council? Councilor, let me do Entman first and then Anderson.
You know, I'd just like to make a statement. I had an opportunity to be down at the EOC during the weekend when the storm hit, and saw again how the city responded and how the teams responded to an emergency that could have been a lot more severe for us all the way around. Yep. And I must state, just like when we had the issues with the sewer department, the teams stepped up and really did an absolute fantastic job. And I'm always impressed by our city employees because the worker bees want to get out there and they want to get it done, and you guys are holding them back a little bit because we got to make sure we get it done the right way. Right. So again, I'd like to thank all the city crews and all the city employees for such a great job. Keep up the good work. There's more to come. And I just want to encourage the public too to please be patient. We're doing the best we possibly can under some conditions that were not really the best to work under, but we're doing a great job, I think, for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. They'll be very appreciative of those comments.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson.
Mark, another question came to mind that's been asked to me. The trees, the damaged trees between the sidewalk and the city street, explain how we're going to process those.
I'll at least share what I know and then probably bring Don up here. There's criteria, and so as far as process from if they pull up to a tree and it's got a hanger, they'll take a picture of it beforehand. They'll GPS the location, the monitoring company will, and the arborist will go up, trim that hanger, ensure that the hanger is 2 inches or greater, and then they'll take a picture of the tree afterwards. By that time, the arborist is demobbing and going to the next tree. That's on a typical trimming because that's largely what we've got to deal with. If over half of the crown of the tree is gone, or that's the top of the tree, that tree will be evaluated and likely cut down. One of the things we've seen on some of our medians is on, like, as you go down out of town on West 12th Street, a lot of those trees, the crowns are completely broke off. We'll probably end up seeing a lot of those trees get cut flush. So that's the initial criteria, and then as we learn more, I know there's going to be questions from the public. I got a couple questions last night. What is the criteria? But the overall criteria is if there's a hanger that's hanging in the street or over the sidewalk, we'll cut it. And then if over half the crown is gone, that tree will be evaluated to be removed. Don, anything else? No. Okay.
Okay. Councilor Karski.
Regarding those trees in the boulevard, are we just cutting the branches off that need to come off, or are we doing anything to make them aesthetically, nice in appearance? Are we doing what we can?
I think that'll be maybe a secondary option that we go with the Parks Forestry crews. Initially, the only thing we can do as we track these costs for FEMA eligibility, these arborists cannot come in and prune. They can only address the hazards. And so that's our first wave.
So we might have trees that look extremely unbalanced out there for a while anyway. Huh?
We could, and so we'll see. That'll be maybe next year. Okay.
Okay. Councilor Jameson.
I also wanted to share a lot of good words of encouragement that I've received, not only for the public works, but for the city in general, and even citizens who are not bombarding the council with concerns or in fact that the city isn't doing a good job. It's been real quiet. And normally we always get a lot of emails getting advice and that we should pass on to you. And we're not getting that. So that's a real good sign from a lot of points. But some of the other officials that I've talked to from the governor's office and the county level have also said a name that I think should be stated today, and that's Regan Smith. Mm-hmm. When they talk about whether FEMA should be involved in all those rules and regulations, Regan's name keeps coming up as a rock-solid guy for the city. And Mark, you're up here a lot of times for the face of Public Works and for the city in a lot of cases, but I'm very confident in hearing all these words from these other officials about Regan Smith. So we're lucky to have him.
We really are. We highlighted Regan the other day. You know, he keeps our EOC always ready, but he also trains our teams. So when these things happen, 8:30 that one morning on the 9th, one call goes to Regan Smith, the EOC gets operated, and ultimately it's a very organized process. And you know, you get to the size of community like the City of Sioux Falls, he's got the direct relationships with the state, the county, a lot of city departments, and then ultimately we feel like we come in and assist Regan. So yeah, he's very good, and we're happy to have him as well. So I think a good note to say too, just with a lot of the recovery, it's been great relationship with the governor's office, the county, the city teams that have all come together. Every department's involved, and ultimately all the private contractors. The private contractors worked with us through Saturday, and when you see any of those private contractors that work with us, certainly tell them thank you as well.
Good. Other questions from council? I have just two, Mark. I also have heard tons of positive comments. It's been amazing to be part of this, to be watching. I mean, I've told people I had nothing to do with this, folks. You've got a great team working here. Two questions. One is the branch piles. You showed us the giant pile in the picture. What happens to those?
Well, we're working on that. Right now, there's a relationship between Mueller Pallet and Poet Chancellor to burn chips on a daily basis, and they've done that for years as a biofuel source. We're having some initial discussions with them as can they take more. If they can't, we're going to have to identify some other beneficial uses. It's not that great of a soil amenity. And so then you start looking at cattle operations and things of that nature that could benefit from it and get some real use out of it. Our best would be to burn it as a fuel source, but ultimately, and our last would be to bury it in the landfill. So our teams right now are working on that to see, but ultimately our goal is to grind it all, restore those sites. They'll be prioritized so we can get the fairgrounds restored, get 69th and Cliff restored, and then some of these other more commercialized sites like the street department, the landfill, they can take a little bit longer for us to recover those sites. So we're working on that. We'll, if we end up going out for an RFP for grinding and reuse, I'll send you an update on that.
Great, good. My other question then is just a reminder, are we still in need of volunteers? And if folks want to volunteer, what should they do?
Yes, there's one number to call if you need help, which is 211. And if you're an organization that wants to provide assistance, call 211. They are connecting both those entities for us, and we're hearing some real positive comments.
Great, good. Any other questions from council? Councilor Anderson, yes.
Sorry. Mark, as you were stating, the fairgrounds is one of the drop-off points. Could you just sort of describe the help that the county and the fairgrounds are giving us out there?
Certainly. Well, first of all, the county came to us because they have loaders and trucks, and so they were one of the first teams to deploy, and they started to pick up the initial branches around the schools in town. So they went, our GIS team, which is operated out of the EOC as well, they printed off a map of all the schools, and then they were deployed to there. They're in our EOC every day and provide their updates. And then the fairground site just logistically is a really good location. It's off an arterial street in Madison. There's good circulation there. It's a good partnership that we have with the fair. I know that the team has worked with them on what the limits of how long we can have that site, but the fairgrounds has been a really good partner in this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. Any other final questions? Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate you bringing us the latest updates, and we look forward to more progress. Moving on, we'll finish City Council open discussion. Any other items for open discussion from the group? Councilor Jamieson.
I just wanted to bring up I read in the Business Journal the Costco property that was sold recently. Did you guys read that too? Sold for $4 million. What just kind of caught my attention was the TIF number 17 that we passed. The last one of the TIFs was for 30 acres. So 15 acres was sold to Costco. Anyway, the point is we provided a $4.9 million TIF for that project. He paid $2.1 million for the land, sold half of it for $4 million. That means he owns the other half that he's going to build the apartment complex on for, well, nothing, I suppose, is what he owes. Anyway, he made out like a bandit. And I made a comment during that time when the TIF was passed that, if a guy like that makes a big check, big cash check, bless his heart for taking the risk. But I think what's interesting is that we don't normally hear a sale price. The developer is the one who develops it. He doesn't sell it off to somebody. And so what struck me a little bit was that perhaps we should have a different mechanism involved when somebody receives a TIF from the city. Clearly you could probably appreciate he held that land wouldn't have sold without the without the TIF that we provided, 4.9 million TIF. And it's because of that the value was now created in that land, because it was going to be cleansed, essentially cleansed enough to be built on. So all I'm suggesting here is that perhaps we should look at TIF 17, now knowing more details about it. And so remember, we were all struggling a little bit. Are we using TIFs too much? At least the community was maybe feeling that way, but I think a lot of us felt that way, that maybe we are. So maybe we should look at that one just because we know more about it now. And then maybe going forward, the idea is that if somebody enters into the city with an agreement to use a TIF and we grant that to them, that if they can show a net profit here of what is going to be tremendous, that perhaps the TIF was overpriced. We gave too much in the TIF. At what margin do we allow a developer to make money? Clearly, all those others who never received a TIF and built the development and started paying taxes right away, just did it all on their own. So I'm just suggesting that partnering with the city and the TIF should constitute some new rules. And I think having the opportunity to look at TIF number 17 now from a little hindsight, we might just be a little smarter going forward, making another TIF. So I don't know if that was something that the council would consider in a committee, or if anybody else had the same feelings.
Thoughts from other council members? Questions, comments? Councilor Anderson.
I think it's a great example of how things can change quickly, you know, after we've made a move as far as the city. On something like this, you know, may have to go on, you know, we may have to look at these TIFs on a sliding scale to where we shorten down the amount of time that they are able to use that TIF, and that the return to the regular tax base for that property would be halved or something like that. I think this would be a good thing for land use to take a look at.
Other thoughts, comments? Councilor Antman?
You know, the thing was, we had some really good presentations made at the time. And we had a lot of good dialogue and discussion. And we had talked about a piece of property that had sat vacant for a while. There were numerous proposals that came up there. And we had a developer that came forward with an idea. And he brought it to us and he asked for a TIF. And the TIF was justified because of the expenses that we're going to use to mitigate the property, the contamination of the property that was there, whether it be right or wrong. But it is something that we discussed quite in depth with the presentation we had. And at the time we made that decision, it was a decision that did make sense. Now, that's not to think that we don't look at that in the future and we get and have city staff come and give us some information on that, or maybe even ask them to come back to us. But I think we need to be careful here that we don't start second guessing ourselves so that we don't make the appropriate decision at the time. The property itself was blighted. Not in a way it was blighted, been sitting vacant for a lot of years. Nobody was willing to take the gamble to do that. We partnered with them by providing the opportunity to put that property straight, to create a business in there that was needed. People made comment that they wanted that business. It's going to create significant amounts of jobs. It was the right thing to do, and I think we made a great decision. We didn't take it lightly, and we don't take TIFs lightly. So I think as we go through the process, a lot of questions need to be asked. But I'm not so sure that we need to go back and look at it again, because we made a decision based on good information at the time, from the support of staff and from the developer and everything. And I mean, if we're going to go back every time we make these decisions and have to second think them again, I'm just not sure that that's what we need to do. I think we've got an example here of going forward. You know, if you think that we ask the questions and we delve into it and we get some more information going forward, but at the time we did it, I think it was the right decision to do.
Okay. Other thoughts, comments? Councilor Anderson.
Just to reply to Councilman Unneman, on that too, and that, I agree with you. This is not something I want to go back on and roll back something. We did make an agreement there. But going ahead in the future, I think this is a great thing for land use to look at, to see if there's any other options in, whether it's a TIF or some other type of grant or options that the city uses to assist in development. I guess I'm just looking at that in the future, not so much what we've already done. But the one that we've already done is a great example of how we moved forward, and maybe we've moved forward a little bit too quickly and taking a look at this. And once again, you're correct. We had many discussions about this. We struggled with this, and with that, it makes it a good subject to just take a look at. Once again, things are always changing. The rules are always changing. We're not able to keep up with the rules that are happening. That's up to the administration to make us aware of, or our own staff. So I think this is a great thing to take a look at. I'm not saying let's roll back the TIF that we've already given. I think that has to stay the way it is. But in the future, you know, items like this, I think that, you know, there has to be other options.
Councilor Rolfing.
As Chairman of Land Use, I think we'd be happy to take a look at this, but to look at, as Councilor Jamison said, to look at the profit, if you will, on that land was not saleable the way it was, just flat out not saleable. And to give the TIF on it, which is spread out over 20 years supposedly, or approximately 20 years, made that land saleable. And for us to stick our nose in and say, well, we got to put a top level on it or a bottom level, what you're going to sell it for, I don't think we want to stick our nose into the market, if you will, at that point of saying, you know, what the high and the low can be. We need to stay out of what's happening in the business world at that point and let the free market go. And so, I think maybe we need to look at this, but I think to use that word, they took a huge profit on it is maybe a little bit too much. And so, because we don't know what he bought it for in the first place either. Well, you maybe do, I don't. But and so it's probably public knowledge at this point. But yeah, we helped it, but we helped a situation evolve there that'll be good for the community in the long run, with the apartments and all the other things that are going to go up there. And in the long run, everybody's going to come out a winner on that. So, yeah, if leadership would like to move this over to land use, we'd be very happy to take it on.
Okay, good. Thank you, Councilor Relping. Councilor Karski, did you have a comment?
When we look at a TIF, it's kind of one of those but-for standards, the way I've been made to understand how the process works. And but for the TIF, this process would have never happened. There was other things that went on there too. It was industrially zoned property, and it was rezoned to commercial. That right there changed the value of the property too. So I mean, are we going to look at how we zone property or change zoning? I think we did our due diligence in this process, and each TIF, I think, has unique circumstances. We learn something, obviously, every time we do it, and that's probably what's important. What question do we want to ask the next time? But I think our process is quite solid the way we do it now, and I'm comfortable with the way things are. And when we do these things, we knew a profit was going to be made, but we also knew that through the long term, the tax revenues, sales tax, property taxes, all that's going to be increased, and it's going to be for the benefit of our schools, our city, and our county. So I think we did the right thing in this process here.
Good, thank you. Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, this TIF we're talking about deals mostly with Costco. But my question is, does anybody know where Costco is now? My understanding is they were supposed to be under construction by now. Does anybody know?
If I could, the Business Journal says they start the 1st of May.
Okay, the 1st of May. Okay, thank you very much.
So I will just then step in. Staff is working with the community development staff, and there are some proposed changes coming down the pipe. Land Use Committee, I'm going to assign this to Land Use Committee, and staff will work with community development to organize this conversation and continue this. Lots of good stuff going on. So let's move forward. Any other items for open discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to move ahead with the presentations. The 2013 Citizen Survey results. Tracy Turbeck, Director of Finance. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Of course, it's always great to be here, but today's especially nice, I guess. The 2013 Citizen Survey has provided us with really a treasure trove of a lot of good information and feedback from the public, and it is absolutely, overwhelmingly very positive information. So I think it's what you'll see when you have a chance to really peruse the report that runs some 200 plus pages. So there's a lot of information in there. There's just a lot of very positive feedback from the public. And today I'd like to go through, first of all, just kind of recap the survey method and talk a little bit about why we do the survey, and then touch on quite a few of the highlights within the report itself. And then before I wrap it up, we'll talk about what I feel, from my perspective, what we've learned in this process.
The survey was conducted by the National Research Center, and that's an organization that's sponsored by the ICMA, or the International City County Management Association. ICMA is an organization that is dedicated to enhancing local government services. And so they've been doing this survey, the NRC has been doing this survey for quite a number of years. In our case, the survey consisted of mailing out 3,000 surveys, or to 3,000 randomly selected residences. Participation in the survey was entirely anonymous, so we didn't know who was responding in which way. Multiple contacts were made with each of those 3,000 residences. There were multiple mailings, so every effort was made to garner a response from each of those that were randomly selected. And the goal, of course, in that process is to achieve a good cross-section, a representative sample of our community, so we've got a good, true picture of what the community thinks. Of those 3,000 that were mailed out, 941 surveys were completed and returned. That's after accounting for those that go undeliverable for vacant apartments and the like. That translates to a response rate of 33%. And that we're told by the National Research Center that a typical response on a citizen survey like this is between 25 and 40%. So we're right in the middle of that range there, and really is a very good response rate. And it's also consistent with what the city has experienced in the past when we've done similar surveys. One thing to keep in mind that I wanted to point out as you go through the survey report and as you hear the presentation today, the margin of error, because this is a sample of our community, the margin of error on the results is plus or minus 3%. So it's quite a narrow margin of error, which indicates that it's a relatively precise, certainly a very statistically, scientifically sound survey, and the results reflect that. Another thing to keep in mind that the National Research Center indicates that changes greater than 5 percentage points are considered statistically significant. So if you see changes of 2 or 3%, don't read much into that. That kind of a change really doesn't mean much with a survey like this. So when we see significant changes of 6% or greater, that is something certainly to take notice of. So why do we do the survey? We want to track our progress. We want to know how we're doing. We want to know what the public thinks. They are our customers, and we want to know how well we're doing in meeting their needs and what they think of their community, so we can learn what we can possibly do to improve the overall quality of the Sioux Falls community. There are really 3 ways in which we use the survey results to measure progress, and you'll see that throughout the presentation and throughout the report. The first thing that we do, this 2013 survey is not the first time the City of Sioux Falls, as you folks know, has done this. We've done an identical survey in 2008 and in 2009. So that gives us the tool of comparing our progress against how we were performing in 2009 and in 2008. So we can mark ourselves and see how we're performing against past performance of our own. Secondly, the National Research Center, as I mentioned, does this survey. In fact, across the country, there are more than 500 different jurisdictions that conduct the same kind of a survey. And so they've established a significant database of information and responses to these very same questions. And we can compare our results, what our community thinks, to how people feel in other communities, whether it's to do with quality of life or government services that are provided. So there's a major national database that we will compare ourselves with. And thirdly, within that group, there are communities that are more similar to us in size that we've asked them to provide those benchmarks as well. So that's the third way we will analyze these results, is comparing with communities that range in population from 90,000 to 300,000. And you'll see that information in the report, and I'll touch on that as I go through the report. Some of those peer communities are some that we commonly compare ourselves to: Lincoln, Nebraska, Des Moines, Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Billings, Madison, Wisconsin, certainly some familiar names. One thing I want to explain as well, when we compare ourselves to those benchmarks, the report measures that as either we are similar to the benchmark, we're above or below the benchmark, or we're much above or much below. So there are really kind of 5 potential landing spots when we compare ourselves to these benchmarks. In order to get much above or much below, you've got to be more than 6% off the midpoint of that benchmark. So it is, you have to be significantly beyond the actual benchmark itself to get a much above or much below. So how will we use this information? Well, today, certainly we're right in the middle of our 2014 budgeting process. This information is very valuable in the budgeting process in terms of setting priorities. So we utilize the information not only to help establish resource allocation in the budget process, but also with planning programs and activities and targeting training opportunities or training needs based on how the public responded to some of our questions. And of course, long term, the goal is to use these survey results to improve city services, enhance the overall quality of life here in our community, and build upon the trust that the city has established with the public. The survey itself is organized into, the report is organized into 9 distinct sections. You see those on the screen here. Within each section, you'll find results to survey questions that address community characteristics that are more general in nature, asking people how they feel about their sense of community or the overall sense of safety in the community or quality of life. And then in addition, in many of those sections, there are specific questions that dealing with specific services. In fact, there are 37 specific services that are covered by the survey. 27 of those are services that are primarily provided by city government here in Sioux Falls. As I mentioned, overall, the results are incredibly positive. I think there's a lot of very good news here in the report, but there are certainly some opportunities identified here that we can work on going forward into tomorrow. So with that in mind, I want to start in with the covering some of the highlights, some of these overall community quality ratings, and this one happens to be rating Sioux Falls as a place to live. Scoring very, very high. 93% of the respondents believe Sioux Falls is a good or excellent place to live. And in comparing to the benchmark, that puts us much above both the national and peer community benchmarks. Overall quality of life was rated at 90%, excellent or good. And again, this ranks much above the national and peer community benchmarks. The overall appearance of the community rated 81% excellent or good. And again, both of these, this rating was above both of the benchmarks, the national and the peer community. This really quite a strong rating goes in large part to good planning and zoning policies that provides a good foundation to develop an attractive community. And so good zoning and planning policies can result in an overall attractive community. Good code enforcement also plays a big role in developing an overall appealing community. And you'll see more results on the code enforcement activities here in a minute. Getting a little more specific in terms of the ratings on the overall design of our community, 2/3 of the people that responded indicated that the ease of getting around Sioux Falls by car is good or excellent. So 2/3 of the people think you can get around Sioux Falls very easily in terms of traveling by car. And again, this is much above both the national and peer community benchmarks. The residents clearly feel significantly better about getting around Sioux Falls than residents of other communities feel about the ease of travel within their own. So that's certainly something very positive to say about our community. Getting very specific now, we'll look at some specific city services that we provide. 45% rated street repair services as good or excellent. That's a significant improvement. I'll point out the little up arrow on the title bar of the slide there. This is one of the areas where we did see significant improvement over 2009. In fact, it was a 13 percentage point improvement, as the graphic indicates. In 2009, only 32% rated street repairs as good or excellent. So we've increased quite dramatically. It reflects the number of people who gave a favorable rating for street repair services increased by 40%. That's jumping from 32 to 45 is a significant increase. This is one of the 6 city service areas that did see a statistically significant improvement since 2009 and also compares well to the benchmark. The national benchmark we're similar, on par with, and the peer benchmark we are above the benchmark. Snow removal services also rated very well. 71% rated our snow removal services as good or excellent. This too saw, since 2008, you can see that the trend is quite positive, although it didn't hit the mark in terms of a significant improvement since 2009. Since 2008, we've seen this, the needle move by 12 percentage points, so that's certainly a positive thing. Significant improvement in code enforcement rating. I alluded to that a minute ago. We've seen that increase from a positive rating of 45% in 2009 up to 57%. As I mentioned, this really goes largely to improving the overall appearance of our community. And I think this demonstrates we're achieving some positive results in code enforcement. The correlation here between strong code enforcement and how people rate the overall appearance is very, very strong. And this too is much above both the national and the peer community benchmarks. The last few slides have been very specific in terms of the city services we're looking at. The employment opportunities in Sioux Falls is more of a general community characteristic again. We've seen significant improvement since 2009, as you might expect with the improving economy. This rating has increased by 10 percentage points, and again, is much above both the national and the peer community benchmarks.
Let's wait until the end if we could. Thank you.
These graphics reflect how people feel about the number of employment opportunities or the quality of employment opportunities here in Sioux Falls. So they've rated 63%, or 63% of them rated them good or excellent opportunities. Economic development services provided by the city were rated excellent or good by 75% of the people responding. So there again, you see the up arrow, so that's a significant increase or significant improvement since 2009. It's actually a 9 percentage point increase, and again, much above both the national and peer community benchmarks. It's beginning to sound a little bit like a broken record where we're well above all these benchmarks. Public safety. There are a couple different areas that are surveyed from a community characteristic standpoint as it relates to public safety. In this case, people were asked about how safe they feel in their neighborhoods during the day and after dark. 97% feel safe in their neighborhoods during the day and 80% after dark. The daytime rating is much above the national and peer community benchmarks, and the after dark rating is above the national benchmark and on par with or similar to the peer community benchmark. So I think people feel quite safe in their neighborhoods. Additionally, public safety was surveyed relative to how safe people feel in the downtown area of Sioux Falls, and you can see the ratings here. 91% feel safe downtown during the day. It does drop off significantly after dark. 47% indicated they feel safe during the day. And I do want to clarify that the breakdown on that 47% rating. There were really 5 options to choose from in responding to that question. You could feel somewhat safe, very safe, neither safe nor unsafe. Was kind of the middle of the road response, and then very safe or somewhat, or very unsafe and very somewhat unsafe. So there are 5 choices. That 47% indicated that they feel safe. That does not mean 53% felt unsafe, because there was that middle of the road group was 19% of them indicated they felt neither safe nor unsafe. So if you do the math, 34% is the percentage that indicated feeling somewhat unsafe downtown after dark. So this is clearly, regardless of what the percentage is, I think it's safe to say that the rating isn't where we would like to see it. It is clearly an area where we do have some room for improvement, and in some ways, from my own perspective, I think it's as much a perception problem, likely more of a perception problem than a real public safety issue, but it's certainly an issue nonetheless that we need to address tomorrow. More specifically, public safety services provided by police department got very good ratings. 83% of the respondents rated police services as excellent or good. That is above the national benchmark and much above, significantly above the peer community benchmark. So our police department's doing a really good job of satisfying the public's expectations. Fire services, it's hard to compete with the fire department. Everybody loves the firefighters. They received a 96% excellent or good rating, and that is much above both benchmarks. It really does kind of underscore the importance of comparing ourselves to the benchmarks, because I think every community runs into this where everybody loves the fire department or ambulance service and those services because they come when you really need them. Not every encounter with the police department is necessarily results in a positive outcome, at least from the individual's perspective. So it is important in order to compare apples to apples to not compare one city department with another city department, but street repairs here to street repairs somewhere else, I think, is a much more valid comparison for us to make. Traffic enforcement, 60% rated the traffic enforcement here in Sioux Falls as good or excellent. That's changed very little from the last survey, and it is below the national benchmark and came in on par or similar with the benchmark for peer communities. This is the only one of 27 city services that did fall below the national benchmark. No other city service, or no city service, including traffic enforcement, fell below the benchmark with our similar sized communities. So we're doing well in traffic enforcement, but in comparison to the national benchmark, we did fall short of that. So I think the takeaway there, people do want the police department to do more traffic enforcement. Although that will certainly cut both ways when it comes to asking them how their encounters with the police department have been. So the more tickets they write, certainly the less favorable their popularity will be, but folks should be happy with greater traffic enforcement. Having a clean city is important. 81% rated Sioux Falls cleanliness as good or excellent, and again, that's well above both benchmarks. Water and sewer services rated good or excellent by 84% of the respondents this year. You can see the trend has been positive, even though we didn't increase in a statistically significant way. We certainly, since 2008, have done so. The trend is a significant 9% improvement since 2008. So we certainly feel like we're heading in the right direction there. Culture and recreational services, city parks, 93% indicated good or excellent ratings for our city parks, and 90% for public library services. So we're doing very, very well in both of those, and both departments received ratings that were well above both benchmarks. One community characteristic that's surveyed is the inclusiveness, and it's asking people to rate how they feel about the sense of community that they feel in Sioux Falls. It's an important rating that does contribute to the overall quality of our community, and as you can see, 93% rated their sense of community as good or excellent. And again, well above both benchmarks. Civic engagement. This rates how welcoming local government is to engaging citizen participation. 60% rated Sioux Falls government as excellent or good in welcoming citizen involvement. You can see that's improved since 2009, although it didn't quite hit the 6% benchmark for being statistically significant. It is well above both of the benchmarks, so we're doing very good in that respect. Another community characteristic people are asked is to rate the overall direction that the city is headed. 72% rated the overall direction of the city as good or excellent. And you can see that's improved very modestly since 2009. Several survey questions were intended to measure how much really the public trusts city to provide the kind of community they desire, and this is one of those, and again is well above both benchmarks. Another key question that helps us to measure the level of the public's trust in city government. People were asked to rate the value of services provided by the city that they receive in exchange for the taxes paid to the city. It's a key rating or key measurement of, I think, how good a value we are providing for services, as well as how well the public trusts us to provide those services. Fully 2/3 rated the value of the services received for the taxes paid to the city as excellent or good. That's a significant improvement since 2009. The needle moved by 8 percentage points from 59 to 67%. And here again, we rate well above both the national benchmark and the benchmark for our peer communities. Clearly, public trust in city government is high in Sioux Falls. That's certainly a very common theme throughout this report. The survey on city services certainly wouldn't be complete if we didn't measure the public's impression of our city employees. You've had some conversation about that earlier in your meeting today, provided some good feedback. The overall impression, according to the survey, was 77% rated their overall impression as good or excellent. So that's a very good rating. Within that, employees were also rated specifically on their knowledge, responsiveness, and the courtesy that they showed the public when they were serving them. All of these ratings were on par or above the benchmarks, with the exception of the question on courtesy. We did fall below the national benchmark on courtesy to the public in serving them, although we were similar to the benchmark in our similar sized communities. I think this survey, this particular finding, offers another opportunity for improving how city services are delivered to the public. I know Human Resources, even prior to the survey results coming out, was making plans and developing citywide training, or training for citywide for employees on customer service improvements. So I think we're on the ball there in terms of addressing that point. On a related note, I wanted to mention too that it's not on a slide, but people were asked in the survey about their recent contacts with city employees. They were asked if, over the past 12 months, have you had an in-person telephone or email contact with a city employee? And 42% indicated that they had, and that was a significant drop from 2009. It was in 2009, 53% indicated that they'd had some sort of direct contact with a city employee in the previous year. So we're seeing the number of direct contacts from city employees with the public drop off, and I'm not sure what all gets factored into that. I think it's an important observation included in the report, and I think at least to some degree certainly reflects the use of technology and people having the ability to really serve themselves and get a lot of the information, whether it's on the website or by watching council meetings online or just retrieving that kind of information in some other way. But it does certainly underscore the importance of providing good customer service. Sioux Falls residents rated all levels of government above both the national and peer community benchmarks. So we, I think it's fair to say in Sioux Falls, people do feel like their governments are serving them well. Overall, city services were rated good or excellent by 80%, and as the chart shows, that's significantly above all other levels of government included in the survey. So that really, those are the highlights on the standard questions that are asked in all of the National Research Center's surveys around the country. Our survey did include 3 custom questions, and I'll cover those briefly. The first custom question we asked was for whether or not they agreed, or to what extent people agreed with the City of Sioux Falls placing a higher priority on investing taxpayer resources to promote job growth. And you can see the results here. The strongly agree and somewhat agree, 82% indicated that they do believe that should be a higher priority. Custom question number 2, how much do you support or oppose paying a higher fee to have snow gates implemented throughout the City of Sioux Falls? And you can see that 57% indicated some level of support for higher fees for snow gates. The third optional question that we asked people to rate the importance of making investments in a number of areas. There were actually 20 different areas of government activity, local government activity that they rated, and you can see the 3 responses that received the most highest ratings from the survey actually indicated 90% or more for those 3 areas: streets, traffic flow, and parks. So overall, what have we learned from the survey? As I said, it sounded a little bit like a broken record over and over and over again. We were, in most cases, much above the benchmarks, either nationally and with our similar sized communities. So we compare very favorably in almost every area when we compare ourselves to other communities around the country, from as small as fewer than 1,000 people to very large communities that are populated in the millions, and then also that group of similar sized communities. I've mentioned a couple of times as I've gone through the presentation that there are 27 services provided by the City of Sioux Falls that were rated in the survey. So I want to share with you how overall those, and we touched on some of them specifically, but overall, how did we stack up? Of the 27 services provided primarily by the city, 15 rated much above the national benchmark, 4 rated above, 7 were similar, and only 1 was below the national benchmark, and as I mentioned, that was traffic enforcement. Now, if we did a pie chart relating our city services rankings with our peer communities, it would look even better. In fact, there were none that were below the benchmark, 2 similar, 4 above, and 21 were much above. So regardless of how you compare it, whether nationally or similar sized communities, we rank very, very favorably. Secondly, we certainly learned that people do enjoy living here in Sioux Falls. That's very clear. I've mentioned the high ratings for Sioux Falls as a place to live, the overall quality of life, the cleanliness and overall appearance of the community all receive very, very high ratings. So Sioux Falls truly is a great place to live, and I think the survey definitely confirms what we believe. The city offers quality services at a great value. We learn that residents feel they're receiving a good value for their tax dollars, much more so than residents of other communities feel about their local government services. And we have learned that we have made a lot of progress in improving our city services and how we deliver those services. In fact, of the services rated, we made statistically significant improvement in 6 areas, 6 services provided by the city. And that means, again, an improvement of 6 percentage points or more. So it does take a lot to move that needle on a citywide, a community-wide survey. It does take a lot to really make a statistically significant difference. So I do want to take just a minute and highlight those 6 areas. Street repair, as I mentioned earlier, improved from 32% to 45%. Code enforcement saw a significant improvement. And Park and Rec, it's combined on the slide, but they were rated as 2 separate items. Park and Rec programs and Park and Rec facilities both saw significant improvement, 12% and 10% respectively. Economic development services saw an 11-point improvement. Land use planning and zoning saw a 9-point improvement. So we've made, again, some great progress in these areas. None of the city services, none of those 27 surveyed, saw statistically significant declines. So we didn't slide backwards in any one of those areas. And that should maybe be a slide all its own, but there'd be nothing on it. So that. Looking forward to tomorrow then, what are the opportunities? As I've gone through the presentation, I've mentioned some of the opportunities that we have to work on in the future. Certainly improving customer service. We're seeing significantly fewer direct contacts with customers. So it becomes even more important to make each one of those as positive an experience as possible for the public. Traffic flow on major streets. While traffic flow was not rated poorly, it was similar to the national benchmark and actually above our peer benchmark. It certainly is an area where there is clearly, I think, an opportunity for improvement. Increasing traffic enforcement, as I've talked about, the only city service that rated below a benchmark. And this, as I mentioned, this service, improving this service can kind of cut both ways. Helping people feel safer in the downtown area after dark. And again, this too is an opportunity for the city to take up in the future. The full report is available on siouxfalls.org in all the 200-page glory. But with that, I will be happy to try to answer any questions you folks have.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. Questions from council, starting with Councilor Rolfing.
I have mine answered.
Oh, all right. Okay, all right. So moving on, Councilor Staggers.
Yes, I guess I'm not really surprised by this report because I think most of us on the council, and we realize we are to live in a great city, fantastic city. But just one quick question. That is, how much did the survey cost?
$22,000.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions from council? Councilor Anderson.
Tracy, on a lot of your displays here, you utilize the surveys from 2008 and 2009. Except like on public safety, I guess I'd like to see what the number comparisons would be on some of those that you didn't show in your presentation here.
Sure. They are all in the report. Any question or any characteristic that has been surveyed in the past, you'll see there is a direct comparison from 2008, 2009, and 2013. The ones we selected to show on the slides generally were those where we did see significant changes or at least a trend over the 3 different surveys. For the most part, those that we didn't show a lot of change. And I think that's in general that's true of a lot of the community characteristics, the quality of life, overall appearance were rated very high last time as well.
Thank you.
Other questions from council? Councilor Jamieson?
Tracy, I want to thank you for sending us the report. We had received it 2 hours before your press conference yesterday, and of late, some of the other reports and studies that have come out, we were never even given that kind of a courtesy. So I wanted to acknowledge that I appreciate the 2 hours advance notice. But I do have one question. I mean, could you just, I think this is maybe a burning question with others, I hope it is, and I'm not out of line here, but I really have a question for the mayor, but I don't see him here, so maybe I'll just ask you. Can you give us this council, one good reason why you had your press conference yesterday before sharing this news with this body? Just one good reason.
I'm not sure, I guess, how to answer that, Counselor. There's no particular reason that it was done yesterday. We had initially talked about doing it the prior week, but with all of the activity with the ice storm and the efforts going into that, we put it off for at least a week. And I didn't want to have to go through this entire presentation more than once, so we did an abbreviated version of it yesterday for the press to get the information out in the public. I would have hoped that it maybe would have sparked a little more interest because we didn't go to this level of detail and this extensive of a presentation yesterday. It was much briefer. And I would hope that would have maybe sparked a little more interest in people to be here today to see the full-blown presentation and all the results.
Other questions from council?
I really, frankly, fail to see the relevance, I guess. I don't understand what the concern is. But.
Right, I think you probably failed because you haven't sat on this side of the desk. But I'm just bringing up a little sore subject with the rest of us that on a lot of other issues, you just happen to be the guy in front of us today exercising the same practice that's been going on for many months. In fact, I could probably give you a list of the last 6 items that have been handled in the same way. I just think that this survey, I was here for the results of 2008, 2009, and these are great reports for us, great tools. In fact, all the city staff should be standing in the line when this report card comes out because it tells us exactly what the public is thinking. And it's our report card, and we should celebrate it together, or, just like it's at home when you get the report card and it maybe isn't so good, you have to figure out what you're going to do different. But we should do it together. And this council, in fact, if you wanted to change some of the policies that are in here because they're not working so well, say we wanted to provide more funding to streets that happen to be the #1 priority of the citizens, how would we do that? This body would appropriate more money to do it. So I think it's important to include us in the beginning and the celebration of this information. And I just feel it's a continuous effort to maybe snub the council in some way or to prevent us from being involved in these certain celebrations. But I was just looking for one good reason, and I didn't hear one.
Other questions from council? Okay. Thanks for your report. I'll remind folks that the report is also on SIRE. So if you're on the agenda with this meeting on April 23rd, you should be able to click the link next to it and find that full report. Anything else for this meeting? We do have a work session following the informational session. I'm going to give us 10 minutes to switch all the technology, do the things we need to do. So the work session will be televised and broadcast on siouxfalls.org in about 10 minutes from this point, and so this meeting is adjourned.